We have a bulletin just received.
I've never encountered anything like this world.
Layers. So we've set up our file in Photoshop and we've explored image adjustments and we've explored selections. In this third video on Photoshop Basics, we'll explore layers in Photoshop. In Photoshop, you can place elements on separate layers, one on top of another. If you select one of these individual layers, it allows you to manipulate elements contained in this layer without affecting elements in other layers, giving us enormous ability to move, to control, to scale, and manipulate individual elements. There are also specialized kinds of layers called adjustment layers that don't contain any content but instead can be used to affect other layers. We'll talk about these kind of layers as well. When we worked with selections, we talked about the ability to select individual elements in a composition so that you have more control over altering them. The concept of layers in Photoshop allows you to have even greater control over individual elements because you can place them in different layers stacked one on top of another. First thing is you'll need to access your Layers panel. It's right here. If you don't see it, then all of the panels are under Window. So you'd want Window, Layers. If it already has a check mark, that means it's already up there someplace and you just have to find it. But Window, Layers, and we'll see our Layers panel here. And we'll see that the image that we've worked on in this selection exercise, there's only one layer, which is background. You can add a blank layer at the bottom of the Layers panel here. This icon right here is a new layer. Click, and it's a new layer with nothing on it. You may want to add new layers if you're doing a digital painting, for instance, for this project. But right now we don't need an invisible layer, so we're going to hit the little trash can next to it, delete layer. If we hold the mouse over it, it says delete layer. So if you have trouble remembering what the icons do or what they are, just hold your mouse over it and let it tell you what it is. Delete layer, hit the trash can. Yes, I want to delete the layer. Click. Now we're back to just one layer. So we want to do a couple things. We're going to open up two other images. We want to open up number 2 and number 3 for selections because we already have number 1 open. Now notice they're not right next to each other. If they were right next to each other, I could hold the Shift key down and select more than one image, but since I want to select the first one and the third one, but not the middle one, I can hold the Command key down. Click. Still holding the Command key. Click. I've selected 2 and 3, and I hit Open. So now I have 3 images with 3 tabs. All right, so we are going to use this as the background, replace the sky with the dramatic clouds, and we're going to put our figure into the landscape. So first, select number 2, this landscape, and let's use the magic wand and click on the sky. Because it's pretty close to a solid color with uniform edges, then the magic wand should work pretty well. Click. So I'm going to change the tolerance to 32. Go click. And if it's not perfect the first time, then you can see I have the Add To on the magic wand, and I clicked a few times, and without much trouble I made a selection for the sky. So if your sky is selected, we're going to have to do one more thing before we get rid of that sky in order to replace it. We can go to the Layers panel and see where it says background and see where it has a lock. The background, as you might imagine, is always the bottom layer. It's the background, the thing in the furthest back. But we want to place this layer on top of another layer with the clouds. So we're going to go click, click, and you can retitle layers. You can call them something descriptive. So if you have an image with lots and lots of layers, it's really helpful to retitle them and call them something so you know what they are easily. So this one will be layer 0, and I'll just call it landscape. Hit OK. So now that it's called landscape, I'll hit the delete key on the keyboard, the main part of the keyboard, delete, and it disappears. Why are there little gray and white checks on there? That's to show you that that part is transparent, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to tell the difference between transparent and white. So when we see those checks, they don't print if you're printing this. They're just to indicate that it's transparent there, that there's nothing there on our landscape layer. Select, deselect. Now I'll go to the file 3, the clouds, beautiful clouds, and I'm going to tear away the tab. I'm clicking, holding on the tab and pulling it away so I can see part of this image and part of our landscape image at the same time. Now I'm going to select the first tool in the toolbox, the Move tool, and I'm clicking and holding down on the clouds and dragging it over and letting go, and now the clouds are part of this image. And notice when I drag something into this document, then the clouds are automatically put on a new layer. A new layer is always created when you drag an image into your document. Now I can click on this one, click, and call it clouds. So now I have the new layer with the clouds that I've dragged in here. But notice if I put it in place, then it's completely covering the other image. What I want is for the clouds to be behind the landscape. So what I can do is go to the layers panel here, and I can click and select the landscape layer, and I can drag up so that the landscape layer is on top. Whatever is in top on the layers panel, that's what's in front in your document. So always remember to select the right layer. Now I'm selecting the clouds layer. Now I'm selecting the clouds layer and I'm moving them into position. I don't want the mountains to show, just the clouds, right? That looks pretty good, more dramatic. Now we'll drag the figure into the composition. I'll select the figure tab, drag that away so I can see a little bit of the figure and the landscape. Now we've already made a selection mask for the figure, and we want to get that back so we can select and drag just the figure but not the white background. So we go to Select, Load Selection, Person Mask, OK. Now we have a selection mask around just the figure. So we still have the Move tool selected. So I'm clicking, holding down on the figure, and I'm dragging it over to the document with the landscape and letting go. So I can just see the head. But we want him to be in the front, so I drag him to the top of the layers panel. And I'll call that one Person. Okay, so we have Person, Landscape, and Cloud. So we have 3 layers in the layers panel. And let's say I want him to be a little bit smaller. The easiest way to scale something is make sure that the Move tool is selected and have Show Transform Controls selected up here. And move to a corner, then you can scale it down and it stays proportional. And then there's one last thing to do. If you look up here, we're telling Photoshop, yes, we want to redraw the pixels by hitting the check, or we hit the little Ghostbusters no sign if we don't want to do it and want to start over again. So I'm going to hit the check, and now it's redrawn at that new size. And by the way, you want to have an object that is large and high resolution and scale it by reducing it. You don't want to stretch an image and try to enlarge it drastically if it's low resolution in the first place. It's just not going to look very good. So if you put the cursor right on the corner there, you'll get the double arrows that show you that you can rescale it. But if you move your cursor slightly over the corner, then you'll get a little curved arrow, and that shows you can rotate. You have to have Show Transform Controls selected in order to be able to do this. So I could rotate an image if I wanted to. So since I don't want him falling over, I'll hit the little Ghostbusters no sign and say, no, I don't want to do that. Now notice, because there's individual layers, one, I can select the person layer and I can grab him and move him around and reposition him. If this was all in one layer, then there'd be a person-sized hole if I selected him and moved him to a different part of the composition. This way I can reposition him and I don't affect the background layers at all, right? And that's the same with all of these things. So now whatever layer is selected, for instance, I could do image adjustments. I have the landscape selected, so I could do hue and saturation, and I could change the saturation. I can exaggerate that and move the color temperature over a little bit, and it only affects the background. I'll exaggerate it momentarily so you can see it's only affecting the layer that's selected. Then I can select the person, and I can do image adjustments that are only associated with the person, right? So again, and hit OK. So you can control individual layers and the things that are on them by selecting the layer. So if you're new to Photoshop and you have a multi-layered document and you're trying to affect something and it's not working, then remember that you have to select the right layer. You have to select it to affect it. You have to have the right layer selected in order to do whatever you're trying to do to that layer. And with Photoshop, you can basically have as many layers as you want. And with layers, you get an incredible amount of control with your composition. You can rework and reposition images indefinitely. And with layers, you can make layer groups and organize them if you have lots of layers. You can merge and combine different layers. So I have the landscape selected, and if I go to layer up here at the top, I can go to merge down, and it will merge with the layer that's directly beneath it. I can merge visible. There's little eyeballs next to the layers, and I can make them temporarily invisible so I can see what's underneath by unclicking the eyeball. Okay, so I could select just these and merge visible. Or I could layer flatten image, so all of the layers would be flattened, merged into a single layer. So again, it's another way to get more control over all your layers. I'll do merge down, and since I have the landscape layer selected, it'll merge down with the clouds, so now the landscape is one single image. I'll undo. So I've selected the person, and I wanted to talk about adjustment layers. I mentioned earlier with the image adjustments that there's a non-destructive, non-permanent way of doing image adjustments. So to add a new adjustment layer, you want to see the adjustments panel, which is right here. If you don't see it, Window, Adjustments. The adjustments panel has a lot of the same kind of adjustments that you find under image adjustments. Like I'll pick brightness and contrast, and I'll boost the brightness and I'll boost the contrast. Now when I'm doing this, you'll notice that this is the adjustment layer here, and all of the layers underneath the adjustment layer are affected. I'll exaggerate it so you can see. So if I put an adjustment layer here, it has the ability to affect all of the layers that are underneath the adjustment layer. So sometimes that can come in handy. Now, what happens if I want it to just affect one layer, like the person layer, but not the landscape or the clouds? I can go to this icon here at the bottom of this panel, which is the Properties panel. It pops up whenever I choose one of the adjustments in the Adjustment panel. So I can go to the bottom here, and if I hold my mouse over it, it says this adjustment affects all layers below. So if I click on it, then I've attached it to just the person layer, the layer that's right underneath it. Right? And I see this little arrow here to show me that it's clipped to my person layer. So now when I affect it, it only affects the layer that it's clipped to, that it's attached to. Okay? So I can close this, and I can work, and if I decide later I don't like what I've done to the person in terms of the image adjustment, I can just click on it again, and change it. That's why it's non-destructive, because I can change my mind later. It remembers the original state of the image and applies the adjustment to it, but I can click on it again and change it anytime I want to, or I can get rid of it entirely. So non-destructive adjustment layers are found in the Adjustments panel, and when you choose one, it adds a new adjustment layer in the Layers panel. This completes our instruction on Photoshop Basics. In the next video, we'll talk about creating and saving colors in Photoshop, using the brush tool for digital painting, and we'll also cover some tools that are helpful for colorizing individual elements so that you can use them in your color harmony project.